Good evening. I'm Robbie Scott. I'm the director of the Post and Courier's Education Lab. Welcome to our second in a series of educational forums that will be held around South Carolina. Tonight's topic, charter schools on the rise in South Carolina, challenges and opportunities. The Education Lab is a non-profit arm of the Post and Courier. The free content we write, the forums that we present, and the engagement that we advance, the impact of all of that is because of our sponsors. We'd like to thank them. Tonight specifically, I want to make sure, can everybody hear me? Can everybody? I can use my teacher voice.
No, we got you.
All right. Tonight I would like to thank our host, the College of Education, University of South Carolina. Specifically, I'd like to thank Deans Tommy Hodges and Angela Baum. Thank you so very much for this wonderful facility. And a very, very special thank you to our sponsor, South Carolina Children's Fund. Simply put, tonight's event would not be possible without them. And I know he's here. Specifically, I'd like to thank Christopher C.R. Ruskowski and Nikki Dickens. Thank you both very much. Also, a very, very special thank you to those of you joining us tonight from Indiana. I know we have the Mind Trust here. Brandon, where are you? Thank you for coming. We also have Ohio represented here tonight, Greenville, Aiken, Myrtle Beach, Darlington, and if I didn't name you, it doesn't mean because we don't appreciate you. Thank you all very much for coming. Thank you everyone from the Palmetto State. Although our format tonight is a panel discussion, we're going to leave considerable time for Q&A and conversation at the end of our program. We encourage your questions and we appreciate your voice. To introduce our moderator and our panelists, please help me welcome Bernie Heller, publisher of the Free Times.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
My nickname is Heller the Yeller, so I go ahead and lead this. Thank you for that introduction, and if you're in Columbia, people always like to associate me with the Free Times, which is one of our brands, but I'm also the publisher of the Post and Courier here in Columbia. And I wanted to say thank you very much for everyone showing up here. As a publisher, it just warms my heart when I see this many people engaged in a topic that is so near and dear to all of our hearts. So tonight, we've got our two panelists. Ian Grenier is a reporter with our Education Lab here based in Columbia, where he covers state education policy, the University of South Carolina, and other local school districts. Originally from Charleston, he graduated from USC before joining the Post and Courier. And before that, he was a reporter for a booming Victoria Advocate in the illustrious metropolitan area of Victoria, Texas. So welcome, Ian. And Ian is joined by Adam Parker. Adam has earned 2 degrees in music and then spent a decade in the business world before going back to school for a graduate degree in journalism from Columbia University. At the Post and Courier, has worked on several beats over the years, including religion, education, the arts, and most recently, race and history. Today, he's the editor for the climate and education teams, and as a longtime student of civil rights movement in America, he has written extensively about the African American experience. He is the author of the biography Outside Agitator, The Civil Rights Struggle of Cleveland Sellers Jr., which was published by Hub City Press, and Us, a journalist look at the culture, conflict, and creativity of the South, which was published by our very own Evening Post books. So without further ado, I will turn it over to our illustrious moderators, and thank you again for joining us.
Thank you, Bernie.
All right. Well, welcome to the Savvy Social Security Planning for Boomer. We have a lot of financial stuff to go through tonight, but wrong one. Charter schools, right, sorry, charter schools. I want to introduce you to our illustrious panelists. Off to your right is Derek Black. I will read you his biography. Professor Derek Black is the Ernest F. Hollings Chair in Constitutional Law and the Director of the Constitutional Law Center at the University of South Carolina's Joseph F. Rice School of Law. His work focuses on the intersection of constitutional law and public education. He is the author of multiple books, most recently Dangerous Learning, the South's Long War on Black Literacy, published by Yale University Press in January. To Chris's right is Dr. Trevor Ivy. He is the founder and executive director of the Liberty STEAM Charter School in Sumter, a national board certified teacher with experience in K-12 and higher education classrooms. His network of campuses enrolls hundreds of students with a focus on interdisciplinary and project-based education. Then we come to Mika Childs. She is the director of the Office of Choice and Family Engagement at the South Carolina Department of Education. Once a teacher in the Richland II School District, she spent years in state government and politics, and now coordinates the Education Department's relationship with charter authorizers and charter policymakers. And then we come to Superintendent Chris Neely, who leads the South Carolina Public Charter School District, one of South Carolina's statewide charter sponsors. A father and National Guardsman, he has experience in government and the private sector, and now runs a system that includes over 20,000 students in dozens of schools throughout South Carolina. Welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us and bringing to us your expertise. I feel like I want to stand.
Fire away.
I should. No, I'm gonna sit. I don't want to stand out. So tonight we're going to cover a bunch of bases and ask our panelists for their insights on a number of questions. We're not going to be able to cover everything, naturally. We hope that some of you will have good questions for us at the end. Questions, not speeches, please. And we'll do our best to answer them. We'll leave a fair amount of time at the end for Q&A. So anything that occurs to you. We're hoping this will be conversational, that questions will lead to more questions, that kind of thing. And I'm going to start with this sort of sweeping thing. What is a charter school anyway? Like, how do we define it? How do we create them and govern them? And what are the costs of setting up a charter school? And how do they differ from other public schools? Because, of course, charter schools in South Carolina are public schools. And what is the governance, that sort of thing? Ian, why don't you take it from there?
Well, Superintendent Neely, maybe we can start with you, of course, in the Public Charter School District. Can you give us the rundown of what a charter school is and what a charter school isn't as well?
Yeah, so the concept is really all about putting kids first. Kids are at the center of the conversation when it comes to the governance of the school, which is locally run by citizens who start the school. Charter schools are innovative. They're called to be innovators in education and in the law in South Carolina. And innovation can mean a lot of things. It can be the curriculum, the instructional model. It can be the operations of the school. Charter schools are unique in that because they're locally operated, they have the freedom and the ability to do things more like the private sector than the public sector. That can be good and that can be challenging. But what we've seen over time since charter schools first began more than 30 years ago in Minnesota is that they truly have been these laboratories of innovation in the way that we operate, run schools, make them more efficient, more effective. Charter schools are also unique in the fact that they look at the community a little bit differently. So because they're created by local citizens and by families, what you see is the unique character of the families that attend the school. Parents make choices. And I think there's a lot of myths out there about charter schools. I appreciate you stating the fact that charter schools are public schools. They're also free schools. They're open to every single child. And if you're like me, I've got 3 children, and all 3 of my children learn differently. They all needed a different type of school. They needed a different type of classroom and teacher. And that's really what charter schools are about, is to provide another alternative to our current public system. We're not out there to hurt the traditional schools. In fact, we're there to really help them be better. And through that autonomy and that innovation, they can then adopt those measures to help themselves be better so that all kids benefit in the community. So charter schools are free, they're public, they're open to all children, they're innovative, they're autonomous. And when you look at the state report card data in South Carolina, we do it on a lot less money. There's an $8,000 difference between a charter school student in South Carolina and a traditional student. So that's really the value add, is that we've proven that we can do it on less resources, without transportation and buses, without facility dollars, without access to bonds. And by the way, we don't raise your taxes because the law won't allow us to. So I think that's the grand bargain, and I think that's how charter schools in South Carolina.
Sometimes you don't have enough money.
Well, everyone can say that you need more money. And that difference does make a difference because charter schools have grown in terms of our population of students with disabilities, students in poverty, and students with disability. It does require more money to educate those children and make sure that they have all the resources they need to thrive in school, and so that they're included in all the programs with all the other students. But we've proven that we can still do it on less, and I think that's, less is more, and I think that's a great story for South Carolina.
And Dr. Ivey, you're on the ground doing this work at Liberty STEAM. Talk about flexibility, autonomy, independence. What does that look like at your campuses in practice?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Again, my name is Trevor Ivey. I have the proud honor and privilege every day to wake up and fight with a fierce sense of urgency in leading the work of Liberty STEAM Charter. We are 3 campuses serving nearly 1,000 children from 6 different counties, 17 zip codes, and we are as public can get. And I appreciate the superintendent naming that. That's a big myth out there, that charters are not public schools. 15% of our scholars receive special needs services. 73% of our scholars qualify for free or reduced lunch. 70% of our scholars identify as a minority. We have a wait list right now in year 5 of operation of 1,489 scholars. So when I think about those buzzwords that you just mentioned, flexibility, autonomy, look, the work of charter schools is a bottom-up approach. 7 years ago, when our board chairman stood on North Main Street in Sumter, Greg Thompson, and said exactly what our superintendent just echoed. We're not here to compete. We're here to offer a different alternative, and that's the true spirit of a charter. You shouldn't be authorized if the model is locally available. And so the charter is supposed to meet the true needs of the community. So when you think about flexibility, when you think about autonomy, that is the heart of the model of Liberty STEAM Charter. We're on a mission to provide access to middle-class jobs and increase access to workforce development right here in our community in Sumter around the key workforce development pathways where the jobs are waiting for our children. So why not create a model that is meeting the needs in our community? Quite frankly, if it was already available, we wouldn't need to exist, right? And so when we look at the jobs in Sumter that are being forecasted in the next 7 to 12 years, Sumter is a rural pillar. If Sumter falls, Clarendon, Williamsburg, Lee will fall as well. So health sciences, business technology, industrial technology, and engineering technology, think of a technical high school that already exists, turned upside down, and we're starting with 5-year-olds to expose them to a future that they just don't know about yet. So the end goal, truly mission aligned, is to keep children in the community of Sumter because those jobs are waiting for them. So we do that through a flexible model, more time on task, a longer school day, a longer school year. What we consider to be prevalent in the model, access to social emotional learning, that's built into our school day. That's not locally available. But then the heart of our enrichment model that intentionally provides exposure to scholars an hour and a half a day to those 4 workforce development pathways. Imagine a 5-year-old kindergartner learning about vital signs. Just imagine that. We've got floors at Prisma and Sumter that are not running because we don't have enough nurses. So we don't need to look to other counties to bring in nurses to Sumter. We have them right there in Sumter. We just need a educational model that is going to meet the needs of the community that exists, that's going to produce those graduates that are equipped with the knowledge and skills and the dispositions ready to take those jobs.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. And you were talking about authorization. For those in the audience who might not necessarily be familiar with what that process looks like, how that system looks like, maybe Miko, could you walk us through what the wonderful world of charter school authorization looks like in South Carolina?
Yes, and thank you for the opportunity to be here. When you're looking at authorizing in the charter school space, it varies from state to state. In South Carolina, our first charter school authorizers were our local school districts. By law, all local school districts are able to authorize charter schools, and we welcome working with them. We currently have about 9 local districts that authorize charter schools. Some have 1, and others have 8 or 9, and so there's variation. And we welcome seeing more of our local school districts entering that space, re-entering that space, as charter schools continue to be an important option for parents to have. We also have the public charter school district. Chris is the superintendent of the public charter school district. It's been around for some time. It was created by the General Assembly. It is a statewide charter school district. And so what that means is its boundaries coincide with the geographic boundaries of the state. And that makes it different from the local authorizers that can authorize schools locally in their community, but the statewide public charter school district can operate schools throughout the entire state. The third type of authorizer we have is another type of statewide authorizer, and that's going to be our IHE authorizers. So they are institution of higher education authorizers. So our colleges and universities, our technical colleges, are permitted to come forward and register with the Department of Education to be listed as a charter school authorizer. And so those are the types of authorizers we have in South Carolina. The first 2, the local authorizers and the public charter school district are set aside by statute, whereas the second type, we don't force institutions of higher education to serve as authorizers. They may choose to register, and if they do, they walk through a process with the Department of Education to prepare them to authorize schools. And from that point, they are allowed to accept charter school applications like any other authorizer is allowed to do in South Carolina.
That seems complicated. Why are there 3 different authorizers? I mean, isn't there an easier way to do this?
Well, it's about permitting as many options to come forward as possible. And what we saw in the early days, in South Carolina, we've been authorizing charter schools, we used to call it sponsoring, since the mid-1990s. Initially, there were charter schools that came forward, but we realized that there was a benefit in having multiple types of authorizers. And with that, the state created the statewide public charter school district, and that allowed another way for charter schools to form. In part because there were some school districts, for various reasons, there were some local districts that were hesitant about allowing a charter school to form. Yet, there are instances where the demand still existed. And that demand may be for a workforce development need, it may be because of performance of the schools in the area, it may be that there was an innovation, either in instructional practices or other models that a leader in the community wanted to bring forward. And so the South Carolina General Assembly, I think, wisely formed the statewide public charter school district to allow almost a release valve so that demand could be met, but there's a balance. A school that's authorized by a statewide authorizer, remember there are 2 types of statewide authorizers, the public charter school district and those that are associated with an institution of higher education. In the communities where they plan to geographically locate the school, they do have to do needs assessments and get a level of community buy-in. And so the General Assembly informed the public charter school district seeks to meet that balance of there being a local entity, a committee, a planning committee that wants to bring forward a charter school, with the reality that for various reasons, the local school district may just not have chosen to move in that direction, but that local district still has an opportunity to weigh in. And that similar dynamic exists with the institutions of higher education that are authorizers. They too operate statewide. When they open a school, before they approve the applicant, the charter school planning committee must demonstrate need and work collaboratively with that local community. And so is it complicated? Yes, but I think there's a benefit that comes from it that far outweighs the costs that are tied to it. And so it's a worthwhile challenge to meet because it's allowed charter schools to continue to thrive, because the reality is that for any given charter school, the local school district may be a great fit, but it might be that one of the statewide authorizers is a better fit. And ultimately, we're trying to expand high quality options for as many children as possible, and having multiple authorizers we found to be important to that end.
There's also a practical reason. I was the school leader at the Meyer Center for Special Children in Greenville, and it's a school for all children with disabilities. And it was originally one of the first charter schools in South Carolina, started in 1998, under the Greenville School District. The Meyer Center had a demand in the upstate from parents that wanted their child to be able to get the therapies and the services that Meyer Center offered. Unfortunately, if those children were outside of the boundaries of the Greenville School District, the Meyer Center wouldn't get money because they were a school of the local school district. So with a statewide authorizer, like the public charter school district and the higher ed authorizers, it doesn't matter where the child comes from. Kids are no longer locked in by the zip code in which they live. And for many families, they have no choice about where they live, but they should not be locked in there and not have options like sending their child, or like my child with Down syndrome, to a place like the Meyer Center. And so the money then follows the child regardless of the county in which they reside.
Derek, you look concerned.
Well, no, I'm not concerned. I mean, I guess in full disclosure, maybe I'm odd person out.
That was by design.
Yeah.
Because it's very odd.
Yeah. So, but in any event, I think of charters as an empty vessel. I mean, I think we've heard a lot of good things about them. I think they're empty vessels, which is we make of them what they are. And I think one of the dangers that critics make and proponents make is painting with broad brushes, right? Charter schools are extremely diverse in terms of their quality, their student demographics, their leadership, their motives, and there are some fantastic charter schools out there that I would not hesitate to enroll my child in. And there's some at the other end of the spectrum, and there are some great authorizers. And I would put, the statewide charter on the better end of that spectrum. And then there are some abysmal authorizers with, I think, highly problematic motives. And so, that's not to criticize anyone here. I think actually we've got some good folks here. But I think we've got some really sort of problematic situations that may not be here. So that's number one, right, that there is this diversity. That's important to note. And, another thing we have to always talk about is, are we comparing apples to apples in terms of student population, right? You can have a charter that is representative of the community in the way that Trevor was talking about, but they're not all representative of the community, right? Some of them have much lower levels of special needs students and at-risk students, and so, they're doing something cheaper because the job is easier, right? And hats off to folks that can do more with less. Right, so I'm not here to criticize folks who do more with less. And there are consequences, right? If we think about efficiency, we've heard efficiency. And again, I guess I should say, in full disclosure, why I'm not sort of pro-charter is to say when I say something favorable, it's not false praise. We don't need 3 authorizers in the state of South Carolina, statewide authorizers. I see that as a huge problem right now, right? Because there's forum shopping, between them, you know, the statewide charter, you know, in its wisdom, terminated a lot of charters a few years ago because they said, hey, you're not up to snuff. And then they just went to another charter authorizer. So yeah, I mean, we've got a very diverse picture, and you know,
That's called authorizer shopping, right? Isn't that the phrase?
Yeah, I mean, and you know, it's a huge problem. I mean, in fact, there were, and I don't know them by name, and I'm not to demean an individual one, but the statewide charter terminated some charter schools, and then another authorizer said, well, they're good enough for us, but even then that authorizer found out a year or so later, well, actually, geez, I see why the statewide charter terminated them, and then they went to another authorizer, right? And so, you know, it's sort of a cascade of problems there. Anyway, I could go on, but I'll stop for now.
Can I just make one quick observation, and I'll give it back to Ian, sorry. The two largest public school districts in the state, Greenville and Charleston, are shying away from charter schools now. Greenville, I don't think has any, or just one maybe. None, right?
None now.
Yeah, and Charleston too has expressed publicly some concern about a kind of lack of accountability. They're sending a colleague of ours, Valerie Nava, just wrote a story a month ago or so about this, that their CFO is seeing a lot of public money going into these charters, but then after that, the district has no control over the money. Like, the schools are relatively autonomous and they get this public money, but then they can sort of do with it as they want, which can be good if they're responsible about it, but it isn't always necessarily good. And in any case, the district that's authorized the charter school and that's funding the charter school now has no control over the finances of that charter school. Even seeing accountability reports and documentation about how, you know, all that. That's a long way of saying, why do you think there's been a retreat within the public school system with these two large districts in this case? The smaller districts are sort of another question. What do you think is going on? And I don't know who wants to answer that. You want to start, Derek, and put in your 2 cents?
Well, I can't speak to specifics of those, but I will say there is always this sort of issue of stranded costs, right? And so, and I won't put you to sleep, I'll say it very quickly, but like, you know, the heating bill doesn't go down when you lose students. The transportation bill does not go down when you lose students. Unless you lose a whole lot of them, you probably can't get rid of any teachers either. So there's a lot of fixed costs that stay present. Now, there are special education needs that can go down. So again, I don't know exactly what's going on in Charleston or Greenville, but I think one of the things that our state doesn't do, and some states do a better job at, is saying, wait a minute, yeah, I mean, the money should go to the charter school, but there still are costs left over in the public school that you can't just say, oh, well, you've lost one student and therefore you don't need X amount of money anymore. The math doesn't quite work that way.
Maybe just want to chime in on that?
Again, I wouldn't try to speak for any one of the local districts. However, I will point out those challenges of the level of expertise that is important to cultivate is why there's value in having statewide authorizers. They focus solely on authorizer practices, whereas in the meetings I've had with the charter school liaisons in some of the local districts, some of the superintendents, you know, charter schools is not the only thing they're doing, and the managerial structure does warrant a level of expertise that it takes time to cultivate while they have other things they're balancing. We, as the Department of Education, are trying to do a better job of providing the local authorizers the supports they need so that some of that heavy lifting that should go into their cultivating sound authorizer practices can be in a better place. That's going to take time, but that's something I'm focused on. You know, recognizing the limited role the State Department of Education plays, but knowing there's an opportunity to learn from what's happening in other states. I'd also say to the notion that that the autonomy charter schools have allow them to kind of shirk any sort of oversight from the authorizer. there's a reason we shifted from saying just sponsor to authorizer. There is accountability that authorizers can bring when they are executing sound authorizer practices. In the space of governance, finance, and academic accountability, there are steps authorizers can take. And Chris will speak to this far more than I can, and I'm not gonna put you on the spot. It's not easy, but that's the important balance we are trying to strike. There is tremendous benefit for local community and the autonomy we see in what charter schools can allow. But yes, it does mean you've got a group of people who are gonna think outside the box and try different things, and there's a huge upside. And when there are challenges, that's where the authorizer has a role to play, to hold that school to account and walk through the steps that are necessary to change the course that school is on. We wanna do a better job of that, and where necessary to close the school. And so, lots of things we could speak to, and I won't go too long, but you're kind of really speaking to why it is good that we have local authorizers as an option. We need to strengthen that because it is important, but there's wisdom in why we have statewide authorizers of different sorts.
About 5 years ago, when I became superintendent of the South Carolina Public Charter School District, I went to my first SCASA dinner and meeting, South Carolina School Administrators Association. And we were seated at 8 top tables, and we went around the room and introduced ourselves. And I was the last one to introduce myself and said, I'm Chris Neely, superintendent of the South Carolina Public Charter School District. And there was another superintendent that said, oh, you're the person that takes our kids. I said, no, I'm not the person that takes your kids because they don't belong to you. I think what you're really talking about here is it's not that Greenville and Charleston aren't doing chartering. It's that market forces are at play. We're in an educational marketplace where parents are actually in charge. And parents are the ones making choices. And when you look at Greenville in the upstate, when you look at Charleston in the low country, it's the largest cluster of charter schools. And it's because parents are demanding alternatives for their children. And so that's what we're seeing here. It's not that those school districts just choose not to do chartering. It's because the market has created more opportunities, more alternatives. And in fact, I would also say that those charter schools are partnering with those school districts. Right now, my school's in Greenville. We've got William Brown here, the founder of Legacy Early College. William, raise your hand. One of the most successful historic charter schools in South Carolina, who he's personally invested a lot of his own personal wealth to ensure that black children in South Carolina can go to college, and he pays for their college. We partner with Greenville School District to allow our students to be able to go on those Greenville School District campuses and have opportunities in career and technology. We partner with Charleston School District, and we work with them to find students that have dropped out of high school to bring them back into the system in our alternative educational campuses so they can get a high school diploma. That's what we're doing. We're actually partnering with school districts. They see that we have this unique niche. The autonomy works in our favor, but it benefits them too.
We've been talking about accountability a lot. It's often said that charter schools get more flexibility, more independence, and with that independence comes increased autonomy. Maybe we could talk a little more, or increased accountability, excuse me. Maybe we could talk in a little more specifics about what exactly that accountability looks like. What does it take for a charter school to get shut down?
Trevor, you want the accountability?
Listen, charters are welcoming accountability. At least that is what the entire experiment is supposed to be about, right? If we're not doing it well, then we shouldn't exist, right? And so this idea that there's no oversight, I hear that quite often. You got folks like Tracy, Don, who are in the audience today from the South Carolina Public Charter School District. We're a proud Title I school. You got folks like John, they're checking our public required documents that have to be posted online. There's no exemption here. We have to follow the same accountability requirements that any other Title I school would have, any other public school would have. But there is this degree of autonomy that we have, that those that are closest to the children are the ones that should be making the decisions. And we shouldn't have to run it up, this chain of command to make decisions and to make them so long when you've got scholars like Taylor and Clayton here from the class of 2035 and 2034 at Liberty Steam Charter. They're on this vessel. It's not an empty vessel at Liberty Steam Charter, and they're future ready going someplace because their mom has made a decision. She's in charge of her baby's education, and she sought out the options. And she has made the decision to make a 1-hour drive every day from Columbia to Sumter for something better for her child. Who are we to say that what she thinks is better for her child is not better for others? We can't put children in a shoebox, right? We got to differentiate. We got to do different things if we're going to get different results. And so it really, I'm trying to control my body language here when I hear about the accountability, and because that could be nothing further from the truth. If the numbers are not right on our financials, we're going to get a call from the South Carolina Public Charter School District. And we are going to have to make sure that whatever discrepancy is corrected. And so what it takes to get shut down, we don't ever want to be. But I can promise you this, when we made the decision to be authorized by the South Carolina Public Charter School District, the best decision we've ever made, we went through a rigorous capacity process to demonstrate over the course of 6-7 months that the non-dreamers, our board of directors, they have the capacity to do sound governance. They have the capacity to make fiscally smart decisions, to be good stewards of the public dollars that we've been entrusted with. So we don't ever want to be on that list, but I can guarantee you if my board chairman were here, Mr. Thompson, he would say, we need to shut the bad actors down and we need to scale up what is working. And if you want to scale up what's working for scholars like Taylor and Clayton and the other million children in this state, we got to find out what is working, and we got to put more resources behind what is working.
So-
We spent days at Legacy learning about what has been working when we wrote our charter, because we know where the good stuff's happening, but nobody wants to talk about it. And now you got folks like South Carolina Children's Fund who are putting their money where their mouth is, and they are putting an investment in schools like Liberty Steam, and we're starting this conversation about what has already been named, which is this perception that accountability is not where it should be. But I can promise you at Liberty Steam Charter, it is, and we are a model for others
So,
of what that governance should
I
be like.
hear a lot from successful charter operators that they want, they like the accountability, they want more accountability, and they think it's important, as you just said, to weed out the bad performers.
Because we're on a mission to be better than what is locally available. You only gonna get there if you get
But that
feedback.
raises a question. Why are there bad performers? You have bad performers. You have some schools that just aren't really up to snuff. So is there a disconnect? I mean, yes, there's accountability, and I realize not every school is gonna succeed magnificently. But why do we accept a system that includes some number, I don't even know what the number is, but some number of failing or poor performing schools in the first place? One could ask the same question about public schools, by the way. But why is that?
Well, I'm glad you recognize that, because they never shut down a bad school. We do. And Professor Black is right. The South Carolina Public Charter School District is serious when it comes to accountability and transparency. Since I've been superintendent, we've closed 5 schools. Now, we don't take pride in that. Their families impacted by those decisions.
I mean, shouldn't your goal be not to close any schools?
Well, the goal should be to have high quality schools, but we do live in a free society and a free marketplace, and all the things that we do, whether it's where we buy groceries, clothes, or eat out, or go to church, schools are really no different. And sometimes you end up with bad market players. And parents make the choice. And when parents decide they don't want to go to a bad school anymore, at least in a choice environment, they can leave. But if a parent lives in a community where they can't get access to a quality school, that child is stuck. And I like to say all the time that kids have one shot in life. And education is the great equalizer. And if they don't have a chance to get out of there, they're never going to have a chance to fully see their full potential in life. And that's why you see charter schools like Legacy and Liberty that are going into communities where it's high poverty, and they're serving those families, and those families are seeing the results. The state report card sees the results. In our district right now, we're a majority minority district. 18% students with disability, 51% of our students are students of poverty. We've grown by 39%, 15,000 students in 2020 to 22,000 students now. That growth and that diversity is because families are wanting something different. Charter schools gives them that alternative, so they don't have to be forced to attend a poor, failing public school.
Derek, I have a question for you. Are schools just like stores and churches and other things in our society? You know, do you think there should be the kind of choice that Chris is talking about, the kind of empowerment of parents and individuals in a market-based system? Or do you think public education, since we're talking about public education here, including charter schools, or do you think public education isn't quite the same as some of these other things in a free market system?
Oh, that was like 3 questions.
I'm good at asking 3 questions
Yeah.
at once.
So at least I'll say something in response. I
Right.
mean, I think, I guess I'm the lawyer, I'll disaggregate your question, which is, number one, I'm not anti-choice. I'm for what I would call controlled choice, and if you want to talk more about that, we could talk about it. So there's a role that both the government plays and the parent plays, because not all choices are equal. And sometimes parents may not know that, right? So you get in a little bit too late. There was a famous researcher in Chicago, and where it has far more, Chicago's probably got more charter schools in that city alone than they've got in the whole state. And she remarked that the real privilege is not having to make a choice. Right? The real privilege is not having to make a choice. Because you know what the public school is going to deliver is good quality. Right? Now, so that's not to say we don't have bad public schools or struggling ones, but like, it's a privilege to not have to make a choice. The idea that somehow another choice itself is meaningful, it's only meaningful when there's other public schools that are failing. And it's not a market. It shouldn't be a full market in respect that, like, ultimately, like, we are constitutionally obligated to run a system of traditional public schools. Those were erected in the ashes of the Civil War to create a new society, to bring us together, to build something bigger. Does that mean that choice can't exist or that we shouldn't have charge? No, I'm not saying that, but the idea that, like, we'll just let the market decide, I think is problematic, because, we're flawed humans. We're flawed government too. But if our choice is to separate into our own, ethnic silos, if our choice is to separate into our own religious silos, if our choice is to separate in whatever silo you want, like, I've got a problem with taxpayers funding that. I've got a problem with that. I think the Constitution has a problem with that. So, but yeah, there can be, and that's why I say controlled choice, right? Is choice being exercised in a way that's sort of consistent with our public values and our public commitments? So I would tweak it, in that respect. You asked me a couple other questions, I probably forgot them.
You aggregated. It's all right. Aggregation's good.
Well, can I add to that?
Sure.
And it does come to the importance of there being education choice. Of course, my bias is I'm director of the Office of Education Choice and Family Engagement, so you're going to know.
So you're pro-choice.
I'm the director of the Office of Education Choice and Family Engagement. In that line of thinking, I do want to emphasize how important it is, as Chris spoke to earlier. There's kind of the notion that in public school, the heart of desegregation, without going into the full history of that, that was something that's aspirational. But what I'm proud of is how in charter schools, we don't see silos emerging or people are running off into problematic arrangements. What we see are communities forming, and I know it's not entirely perfect, I'm not arguing that, but I would say to the extent charter schools allow parents to get beyond their zip codes, it's quite clear that both nationally, but more importantly, here in South Carolina, it does open doors for parents to have access that they wouldn't have if we solely had the traditional public school. We have to have the traditional public school. We will continue to have it for the foreseeable future. That's going to be important for the vast majority of kids in South Carolina. There's really no discounting that. But when you look at the options that are emerging, it's not just about the demands parents have, but it's also just about the reality that things like charter schools provide access that would not exist otherwise. And I don't want that point to be lost, because there is a myth both nationally and I think to some extent here in South Carolina that charter schools or any education choice option is simply going to accelerate folks moving away from one another. That's generally not how parents are making their decisions. It's not what they're pursuing. And fortunately, that's not largely what we are seeing if you look at what's happening in education choice in South Carolina.
I got to chime in on that, and then this isn't about South Carolina, but again, be careful. Don't paint with broad brushes with bad stories or good stories. I think it was the Post and Courier that sort of put out some data comparing our public schools to our charter schools, and so you could share that. But in North Carolina, for instance, and I think North Carolina is a perfect example because North Carolina, it may be news to many, ran the most stable and integrated schools in the history of this country. That's not to say they were perfect or fully integrated, but they were the most stable and integrated the United States have ever seen. I don't think it is an accident that in North Carolina, the charter schools are becoming wider at the same time that the traditional public schools are coming broader. Now, that's different than other states, right? A lot of other states, it actually is the case that students of color are sort of going to charter schools at a higher rate, but that's not the case in North Carolina, right? And so you have to sort of wonder about a public policy in a state like North Carolina, and that's where I go to the control choice. We have to think about these things. We shouldn't facilitate, an old term, we shouldn't facilitate white flight from our public schools. I'm not saying that's what's happening, with the statewide charter school, but I think those are things we have to be attuned to.
Well, as a proud South Carolinian, we kind of ignore our neighbors who ignore it. And we do, South Carolina does do things.
But the barbecue.
Well, the barbecue's the best here, of course. It was invented in Charleston.
Fine.
Yeah. I eat it all. Yeah. And I have lived in North Carolina a few times in my life. There's a big difference between the two states, let me tell you. But when we talk about charter schools and we talk about the diversity, I told you the data just a few minutes ago. The public charter school district in South Carolina is a majority minority district. We didn't design that. We just created welcoming schools that were inclusive and families made choices. Our disability rate's going up by 69% since 2020. And that's because more students with disabilities need what we're offering. Smaller classrooms where they get the attention they need. Inclusive classrooms where they're in a classroom with their peers and they're not segregated down the hallway the way it was back when I was in elementary school. And so parents want those choices, and it doesn't matter what color they are or their gender or really where they're from. Parents just want more choice. And I think Americans in all aspects of our life just want more choice. We want the freedom to be able to make choices that are best for our families and for our children. And if they feel like a charter school can provide those unique supports and services, then they choose us. But I've gone back and forth. I mean, my youngest child has been at a charter school, a private school, home school. Now he's in a traditional public school in Lexington County. You do what's best for your child and not get caught up in the system and put kids first.
And of course, in order for schools, whether they're traditional or charter, to offer all those benefits to students, they need the funding to do it. So I'd love to start a conversation about what charter school funding looks like in South Carolina. Just like regular traditional public schools, charters get funding from the state based on how many students they have, the types of students they have. The big difference is charter schools don't get funding from local property taxes, as Chris has touched on, and we're in Richland 1 right now. A big chunk of Richland 1's budget comes from the property taxes that we pay on cars and businesses, etc. So what does charter school funding look like when your funding comes just from the state and some federal dollars and not from local property taxes? What kind of difference does that make?
Yeah, so a charter school student right now, brick and mortar will bring in about $4,300. And then the formula that the state uses in the state aid to classroom allows for weights for a charter school student for brick and mortar and virtual. And that's to make up for the fact that charter schools don't get the local dollars. It's when a child leaves a traditional public school, the local dollar stays with them, even though they're not teaching the child. They get to keep that money, and that helps them, Derek, with those costs you were talking about, such as facilities and running a bus program and all those kind of things. So they get to keep the money, we get the child, we teach the child. On average, in South Carolina right now, a charter school student gets about $12,500 when you include the charter weight and then weights for poverty and disability that the state adds in. And that's for all students. A traditional public school student gets about $19,000 per student. So there's almost an $8,000 gap per student. Keep in mind, a traditional district gets buses from the state. They get access to bonds that they issue in their districts and counties. They get facilities. They get food programs. They can provide state retirement for their teachers. Our schools can't afford state retirement. I mean, there's a few that do, but it's very expensive, the state retirement system. So they have to offer a 401(b)
Not
plan
that
through
good,
the private market. What's that?
not that good.
Yeah.
That's for the next panel.
The bottom line is there's a huge gap in funding, but I'll go back to the results. And in the South Carolina Public Charter School District, our graduation rate is 86.6. It's the highest in the state, among the state average. Our current reading average proficiency is at 60%. That's right in line with the state average. We're right within the margin in math. And in the EOCs, we're either above or right in the margin with traditional school districts. And we're doing it on a lot less money. So again, I go back to the bargain. Families are choosing us. They know they're not going to get all the bells and whistles. They're not going to get the fancy scoreboards and the AstroTurf football fields and all that. But what they are going to get is a smaller class. In many cases, like at Liberty, they're going to get 2 teachers in every classroom. Or like at Greenville Tech Charter High School, Dr. Gregory, raise your hand. The first charter school in South Carolina. They get to go and get dual enrollment. They graduate with 60, 70, 89 college credits when they graduate from high school and walk across the stage with sometimes 2 associate's degrees. That's the charter difference, all on less funding. Now, could more funding help in terms of transportation? Absolutely. Because when we talk about access to communities, especially rural communities in South Carolina, you've got many cases where grandma is raising a child and can't drive. But they want to get their child to a good charter school. And there's no buses for us to be able to provide them. So that would be one thing the state could do to help, is to give our schools buses or access to buses if they choose, so they can provide that access.
Yeah, the rural communities are really, a whole issue unto itself, isn't it?
And let's talk about the rural communities. You talked earlier about how there's big clusters of charter schools around Charleston, Greenville, there's lots here in Columbia. But maybe, when we talk about this, maybe some of the areas that most need charter schools are rural districts, which are really struggling. Not in every case, of course, but a lot of districts are. But in the part of the funding system is that, as you say, charter schools get bonds, and bond revenues are how public school districts build new schools. And one of the things we've talked to from charter school authorizers and leaders is that it's very difficult to find an actual physical location to build the school. You often turn to private financing developers. So Dr. Ivey, could you talk to us about the obstacles for getting one of these schools off the ground, both physically and, metaphorically?
Yeah, so it's already been stated that charter schools are up against the weight of the world to pull this off, right? No facilities funding, no transportation funding, 30% funding gap. But if you go to our Facebook page every Monday, we post a scorecard, red, yellow, green, of all of our key metrics to show, hey, we have nothing to hide. We're going to do it in an easy to communicate, transparent manner to show that we can do more with less. So Chris shared a few of the district data points. At Liberty, we're proud that our first report card is coming out very soon. Our reading and math proficiency, again, a school that's doing more with less. The numbers are where the proof is, right? 60.
I thought it was the pudding.
What was in the pudding? And the pudding, when you walk into Liberty, is on a data board outside of every classroom. And so no one, because we're on a mission to do better, and we could do better with less. So facilities, part of our mission is to revitalize our community. Why go and build a brand new facility when we can bring a building back to life? You know, we've crossed we've crossed a line in the conversation, a good line. I'm glad that someone brought it up about race, equity, and class. And so to drive that conversation home, in Sumter County, we believe that the civil rights issue in our community is access to workforce development, a middle-class ticket to stay in Sumter. So when we wrote our charter, and you gotta put options in there, you don't know what your facility is gonna be, right? We didn't even have a location, right? When we were approved, we were still finding the right location. And we found Liberty Street Elementary School, which was the institution for grades 1 through 6 during segregation. You were African American in grades 1 through 6 in Sumter City, that's where you went to school. What better way can we be that proof in the pudding that we're talking about here on the stage with race, equity, and class to drive the point really home in Sumter when we say that the civil rights issue in our community is access to workforce development? We place our flagship campus in the former Liberty Street Elementary School to honor the rich historic legacy of that symbolism that once stood as a beacon of hope and inspiration, and then we took the name from the Statue of Liberty. And so even though the odds are against us, facilities, transportation, you can look at our numbers, you can see that we're doing more with less, but there's this aspect of community revitalization. And so when our scholars leave our flagship campus in South Sumter, our core geographic target area, they leave to go to another campus that we're revitalizing in the old mall. And so talk about doing more with less. You gotta have quarterbacks, you gotta have champions in the community. And that's where our dreamers come in, to block and tackle for us. To say, hey, this is where we can help you.
And raise capital, I guess, right? Help you raise the money.
Yeah, we are really excited to continue our expansion at the Sumter Mall. We've acquired 60,000 square feet, a world-class educational facility in Sumter County. Schools in our community haven't been renovated in many, many years. We've got serious issues in facilities in our community. And so what better way to provide that world-class education than uplift a revitalized building in our community that could just be dilapidated and sit on the side of the street.
Trevor, I'm just curious, what is the average teacher salary? What do you pay your teachers?
Yeah, so a starting teacher at Liberty, we're in the top 5 highest paying school districts in the state. And so starting pay is $52,500. $52,500. Now our teachers do work 10 additional days on the school year because we believe in additional time on task. But thanks to the efforts of our friends at the South Carolina Public, the agency, the Department of Education, we participated in the strategic compensation pilot where we believe, again, in those numbers, right? We're on a mission to prove what can happen when potential meets opportunity. And we want to be apples to apples on this vessel at Liberty. We want to be able to compare our children to other children in our community, right? similar demographics. And so with the strategic compensation pilot initiative through the State Department of Education, we're able to pilot something, hold your seats, performance bonus pay, right? And we're really excited to continue that at our school. It has shown great merit. But if you're going to be on Team Liberty, you've already bought into the mission. And the mission of being a charter in the South Carolina Public Charter School District is to put kids first.
All right, so we want to leave a little time for Q&A, and we only have about 20 minutes. Is that right? Yeah, 25, right? We're good to go to 7:30, everybody? So let's start to shift that way. Would any of you like to say a final, very brief word, or make a specific point, or respond to anything you've heard so far? But be brief. I want to hand over the floor to our audience.
Yeah, I'll be brief. First of all, I do want to thank the Education Lab and the Post-Courier and the College of Education for hosting this forum. And Professor Black, I appreciate your perspective and being here. I think at the end of the day, if we care about our communities, if we care about children, I say this often, if we care about the soul of a child, I truly believe the soul of a child is the spark of creativity, of dreams, of aspirations, and a desire to learn and to have friends. And I believe if that's what we're really about, then we shouldn't get so caught up in traditional versus charter and charter versus, private and homeschool and vouchers and all those kind of things. We just need to believe in the child and be able to put the child at the center of the conversation about how we operate, the kind of instructional program we offer, and the curriculum that we provide in the classroom, and have teachers that have that same philosophy. So I'll just say that let's put the kids first. And I think if we do that, as a public sector, we can all work together for the betterment of society.
I'll go there.
Yes, yeah, okay.
Well, I
I
mean-
was going to respond to that,
Yeah,
but go
I mean,
ahead,
I
you
don't-
do it.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a lot that I, could disagree with things like that. But I mean, again, I don't think we have the industry represented up here, so to speak. This is some good folks up here, and teacher salaries high, But that's not the story in a lot. So let me just sort of be quick. You asked me to be quick. I mean, there's a number of issues though with charters and authorizers who I'm not sure that are putting the child first. Right? Now, I think that is the key issue, which we really just haven't spoken to yet, which is, how does the operator relate to the authorizer? Is there a management company that's for profit? Are the people who are on the board, do they have a financial interest in the people who are buying things? And so, again, not accusing any of the folks up here, but it is an industry that is opaque in a lot of respects, right? Leases, are you paying fair market rate for the lease, right? Or are you overpaying a lease because the person that you're leasing it from also sits on your board, right? I'm not saying anyone up here did that, but we don't have rules in place to prohibit it. And we've seen state after state after state have these sorts of problems. We've seen a lot of reporting in this state about conflicts of interest, right? If you found out that Trevor, was Chris's brother, I don't think they're related, right? You might go, well, wait a minute, is that right?
We actually have a policy on conflict of interest, as you know.
Yeah, which is important.
Because as the
Well, let me fit. Because I'm not criticizing you,
Yeah.
but there's a
I
lot
wanted
of
to make that clear.
in the state.
Yeah.
Okay, fair.
Yeah.
And I just think, to rewind back to sort of the old days of Tom Brokaw, there's a lot of fleecing of America or fleecing of South Carolina that happens, right? And so I think it is incumbent on our state legislature to take this moment in time and reflect upon the good work that a lot of newspapers have been doing and say, look, we've got some great charters out there, but we've got some bad apples, and we just need to have some rules in place so that actually, as Chris said, it's the child that comes first, not the school or the charter board's interest or the EMOs, because I just think there's a lot of conflicts out there that are being exploited.
There is a bill that exists, and it might get introduced again in the state legislature to introduce more accountability of charter schools in particular. Who's the sponsor? What's his name? Hembry, right, yes. And the charter operators we talked to would welcome that. I mean, I haven't heard a single one say, no, like, oh, well, that might be a problem. And they all, so there is that apparently in the works. We'll see if it actually gets through. We could probably use some help from the charter sector to advocate on behalf of that.
We're doing that. We've been at the table with Senator Embry.
Yeah.
We fully believe that. In fact, all the authorizers
Yeah.
have been at the table.
Exactly.
Working with Senator Embry and Shannon Erickson, the chairman of the House Education Committee,
Great.
I understand is also going to do something similar.
So, and the only other thing I would add is I think this idea of putting the child first, obviously it doesn't always happen because other interests get in the way, but I don't think you'd find anybody either in the charter school sector or the traditional schools, public schools, who would say otherwise. I mean, I think traditional public school teachers and administrators also seek to put the child first. So I don't know that charter schools are all that special when it comes to prioritizing children.
I think the difference is it's not a motto. It's truly ingrained in our budget. It's truly ingrained in our mission, vision, and values, our strategic plan. It's in the culture of the district and our schools. That's the difference. And I think the difference is now being realized when you look at the data.
And the public schools tend to be more bureaucratic, that's for sure, with layers of. All right, let's open this up to the floor. Questions, anybody? Yes?
I haven't heard anything about standards or curriculum development. Is there anyone who's overseeing the various charter schools and their standards in relationship to the state?
Yeah, that's a great question. So every charter school has what's called a charter. It's a contract with the authorizer, with the district. And in that, they
Is
have.
that why they're called charter schools?
That's exactly right. Novel.
Oh.
Yeah, so in the charter, they have to declare the instructional model and the curriculum they would use. And as the public charter school district, we have to approve that. And that curriculum and the instructional model has to be aligned with the state standards. So our schools all teach to the state standards. They just have the ability to choose the curriculum and the instructional model they want. So they could be a STEAM school like Liberty. They could be a project-based school. I mean, Montessori school, there's lots of different versions. But to answer your question, yes, there is alignment with the standard in South Carolina, and there's oversight to make sure that they're accountable.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but the same report card ratings, for instance, are given for charter schools just like traditional districts.
Yes. Well, I mean, our scholars are held accountable and measured in terms of standard readiness in the SC Ready test.
Yeah.
And so there's more than one way to skin a cat, right? You can't pigeonhole and put children all in one box, but we can get to the end outcome of teaching the same set of standards in a different way to be tailored towards the child that's being served. And so we have it, we in fact at Liberty seek out other schools to collaborate with their scope and sequence documents, their backwards planning design methods and so forth. And so, yes, to answer your question, it's alive and it's very well.
I appreciate the question. Obviously, we can't get to every specific issue in this short time. So if you do have questions about any topic that we haven't covered, great, please speak up.
I actually want to reinforce something, Chris.
Yes.
It's very important. Charter schools are public schools, I'll say that. Believe it, a lot of folks that are anti-charter will disagree. They're wrong. They are public schools. Number two, Chris said another important point. The statewide charter looks at their curriculum, it approves their curriculum, therefore it is a state-approved curriculum. Why do I say that? Because this spring, there was the diocese in Oklahoma that was wanting the state of Oklahoma to allow it to operate a religious charter school. Only point I make here is if you hear what, and I think the charter industry actually is aligned, there's no daylight between us, is that they're public schools, we approve their curriculum, and therefore they can't be religious charter schools, but there is yet another sector out there that wants to get access to charter school funds and actually do something that I think is non-public. And I'm not being anti-religious, it's just that our public schools need to be open to all, and their curriculum shouldn't be religious. And so, big issue on the forefront and elsewhere.
Right, but-
Stick to the standards.
Right, and that's my point exactly. In South Carolina, charter schools adhere to standards. They're held accountable within the state accountability system. And that holds true across all the authorizers.
Other questions? Oh boy, yes.
Someone alluded to this in the conversation about the impact and the difference in funding, but a lot of rumors surface around how charter schools impact traditional public school funding. Is there any relationship there? To Mr. Neely's point, people will say, oh, that charter school is taking our students. Is there something that the public should be aware of, that when more children do go to charters, do traditional schools have some level of funding difference?
No, in fact, it's a net increase for them because they no longer have the expense of teaching the child, but yet they get to keep the local dollars. I mean, that's a pretty good deal. So wait a minute, you're going to go over here to this charter school, they're going to teach you, yet I get to keep the local tax dollars that their family paid through their property taxes. That's a pretty good deal. Meanwhile, the charter school doesn't have access to the bonds, they can't tax, don't have facilities, buses, all the things that we've talked about, and we're doing more with less. But I do appreciate your question because that is a myth that's out there that somehow we're taking money from the traditional schools, but the reality is it's just not the case. And in fact, if a school district's going down in their revenues because they are losing students, but they're also spending too much. So what we saw over the course of the last 5 years was when the federal ESSER money was distributed among school districts in the country, school districts around the country increased their spending. And then they never reduced their budgets when the ESSER money went away last September. Well, now they've got this big gap they've got to fill. That's when you hear school districts now on this cliff saying, hey, the charter schools are taking our money. No, that's not the case. You're spending too much money. And that's where I think the comment about them being too bureaucratic, we operate on 2% administrative. 2%. The average school district in South Carolina operates on 20 to 25% administrative. That's money that's not going in the classroom. 98% of our money goes to the classroom for the teacher and the student. That's where the money should go, is to the student.
It's a little bit of
Let
an
me-
apple and an orange though, because a charter school is a single operation and a school district is numerous schools that requires a bigger bureaucracy in a sense and employees to do things. So it's a little different in that sense.
When you've got a local school district here and the cabinet at the district level costs more than $1 million, that's a problem.
But I also say statewide authorizer, any charter school authorizer, but speaking specifically to the statewide authorizers, they are the LEA, the local education agency for the charter schools they authorize. And so the duties and responsibilities that hold with the traditional school district, many of those flow to the statewide authorizer. So the 2% Chris is referring to is the 2% that stays with the authorizer, the rest goes out to the school. And so that's an important distinction. So when you're looking at total dollar in education, you're looking at federal money, the state money, and the local money. Charter schools are getting the state and the federal, but that local money, that's an important part of the conversation we can't lose sight of.
I agree and disagree. I mean, I would agree that charters aren't taking the public schools' money, but as a factual matter, yes, the public schools have less money. As I said earlier, let's just make it real simple. You got 100 students, here's your budget. You lose one student. Yeah, you may keep a portion of it, but you lost one student, your head count goes down, you get fewer dollars. Now, if your costs go down, it comes out even. But if you didn't fire anybody and you didn't change the thermostat, on and on and on, then your budget's the same. That's not a criticism of charter schools. The question is, should the state be making more sort of nuanced assessments of what does it take to run a school, including a charter school, right, based upon its size, and losing students doesn't necessarily change what it costs for a public school to run.
There's a school district in South Carolina that this year spent $37 million on AstroTurf. AstroTurf.
AstroTurf is important.
I played sports in high school, and grass worked just fine. And in fact, it works for most college football.
This is the
teams.
21st century.
I mean, but that's two different questions. Again,
But that's $37 million that could have been invested to reduce their budget.
and that's
or
the part
invested-
that I would agree with you on. Like, hey, I'm not here to defend my own school district. I won't even name my own school district. But the factual question you asked was, do you lose money? The answer is yes, you lose money.
I think,
Well, but part of that also is tied to, again, you can't lose sight of the fact that you have parents making choices. In that same school, if you wanna say lose money, well, here in the Columbia metropolitan area, you've got families crossing district lines. Okay, but we're not so concerned about the loss of the one district relative to the other. And so as much as we look at that dynamic, it's not limited to just what happens in the charter school versus traditional school space. That's the first thing. Second thing, I want to be mindful of not playing into this notion that the two are at odds with each other. These are children whose parents are making decisions based on what that child needs. So I understand what you're saying about the state playing a better role and offering some level of guidance. But at the end of the day, you have a dynamic system, and to the extent there's play that the existence of charter schools introduces, is not solely within the charter versus traditional space. They should not be at odds with each other, and we do, as a society, have to just contemplate the value of parents engaging in making that choice and the impact it has, the impact it holds. And so I understand the concern raised about it, but it's definitely not limited to decisions going from charter to traditional or to other options. And I'd say it's a worthwhile environment that we're creating for children.
I mean, we can dress it up. The answer to your question is, do they get less money? My simple answer is, yes, they get less. Number two, the 99 families who are left behind are making a choice too. They're making a choice of their public school. This isn't me, I'm not trying to pit the charter against the public, right? And I understand charters are in a leveraged position where, they have needs too. And so I think part of the problem here is we're all fighting, right, for survival for our kids. And I think that's where we get back to this point that, like, the state needs to step up and not create a system in which we have people that are at odds with it. That's right.
Yeah, and I think that's really the problem. We're not willing in South Carolina to just rip the Band-Aid off. The reality is it shouldn't matter which public school they go to, whether it's charter or traditional. Just let the money follow the child. Just literally let the money follow the child. And I hope that Shannon Erickson, the chairman of the House Education Committee's open enrollment bill, will pass next year. Let's stop, as we say, pitting each other against system, focus on the child, let the family make the choice, and let the money follow the child.
There's a downside to that. I mean, there are risks to that model. You could leave a whole school district bereft all of a sudden, and the kids left behind in that district that don't have the opportunity to choose to leave or to transport their kids or whatever are at a disadvantage.
Well, with the national data, education choice has been around long enough that in different models, lots of studies have been done. And while, let's say in the late 90s, early 2000s, that concern, both with fixed costs, variable costs, money leaving the system, children left behind, that's been sorted out, tested out, researched, and it just doesn't bear out. And so over time, especially if you build a strong market, and you can't assume all are right, I'm not going to paint with a broad brush. There are things we can do to strengthen the charter school sector, to strengthen the way we are implementing education choice in South Carolina. I grant you that. But you look across, the meta-analysis has been done, and that notion that children that choose to remain in their traditional school are left in a worse off circumstance, it just hasn't been borne out in the research.
Well, we saw it in Charleston County over the years with school choice, so to speak, and neighborhood traditional schools really flailing and having a very difficult time as families shifted to other schools in the county. In fact, this was a number of years ago now, we did a whole series about school choice and some of the challenges that it raised. I'm glad to hear that it's becoming less of a problem. It's less of a problem in Charleston now than it was when we were writing those stories, that's for sure. We're running out of time though, but I do want to take one or two more questions quickly. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I'm a retired science teacher, middle school science teacher. And
Thank you for your service.
Oh, believe me, I'm right up there. I've got it wrong. But anyway, I have a two-part question. You talked about special needs students needing or benefiting from the smaller classes, and I definitely agree. But what about the one, how severe, what are the really severe ones that we have to take in the public school are you able to take? And the second part of the question, I loved all my children, so don't get this wrong, but there was always somebody who I would rather they went to a charter school. What happens if you get this student who is so disruptive? Do you bounce him back to the public school?
I would say that a lot of times what's happening is the traditional school is encouraging the family to come to the charter school. I don't think any school system, whether it's traditional or charter, needs to be trying to push kids out.
No, I didn't mean that.
Yeah. In terms of students with disabilities that have fragile medical needs, again, I go back to the parent. And as a parent of a child with Down syndrome, who has been to 7 different schools in 9 years and had 3 first days last school year, who has had a lot of medical issues, I have trusted both charter and traditional. And I think if you do put the child at the center, you put the supports in place, and you have the medical support there to be able to provide that care for the child, then the child should be able to go to that particular school. I'll go back to William Brown at Legacy. So Legacy realized that they had issues with healthcare in their community, and they partnered with St. Francis Hospital up in Greenville, and they brought a clinic next door to the school. They built a clinic to benefit those families, especially those families that had children who had severe medical needs, so that those children could go to that charter school. That's the innovative ideas we're talking about. So every parent, including those that have children that are fragile and still want choice, can have that opportunity.
And embracing inclusion, right? And so not putting those scholars, the scholar that comes to us is the scholar we have to serve. At Liberty, we have a 96% persistence rate since our first year. 96% of our scholars have stayed with us. We're making an investment in that child, so we want to meet the child where they are. And so through an inclusion model, where we're not putting special needs children in just a class all by themselves, we're including them into the regular education environment through an inclusion model with 2, sometimes 3 teachers in the classroom. Our percentage of special needs children has grown at Liberty since year 1 because, quite frankly, we're doing a better job. And we can look at the data, and now it's for the whole world to see about what is happening when we don't put labels on a child, and we're so quick to put labels on children. And that is what happened. And we just put kids in classes and we're not actually serving them where they're at. And so your second part of your question about do we get a scholar who is not the right fit is kind of what I heard you say. Do we push them back out? The answer is
severely.
Yeah. Are we meeting them, right? Well, you've got folks at the South Carolina Public Charter School District that are going to check those IEPs, right? They're going to check to make sure that the services that the child is coming with in their IEP, which is a legal document, is being followed, right? And it's reflected in our budget, right? But at the end of the day, that parent is going to drive the decision as to whether this is the right fit for their child. And that is a beautiful thing in the charter sector.
And I would ask, and it's not a gotcha question, it's an ignorance question. Maybe Chris could help. This special needs is a big issue because you could have a special needs kid that really doesn't cost much more than the average kid, but you can have one that costs $50,000 a year. And so how does the statewide charter or any of your charter schools deal with that? Because my assumption is, at least in some other states, that you know, when you talk about scale, a large public school district can absorb that sort of $50,000 or $100,000 child because they've got 10,000 kids. But so, number one, like, is there any adjustment, sort of variations amongst special needs kids, and how do you guys deal with the cost of the really high need kids?
Yeah, so one of the things that we advocated for in the new funding formula in South Carolina 3 years ago was for an additional weight for students with disabilities. And that's on top of money that we get for IDEA from the federal government. I mentioned earlier at the start of this that I was the school leader at the Meyer Center for Special Children. 100% of the students are students with disability. And it costs on average about $45,000 per student. The way we absorb it is we have to be creative and innovative in the community. And we would raise half of our money through fundraisers and in Greenville County. And what we found is when we had such strong outreach in the community, people gave back and they supported that school, and they still do. And that's why that school is still thriving today, is because the community has also been willing to invest in that school. So no, we don't get enough money from the state, but through community partners and through private citizens, we're able to raise money so those kids can go to the Meyer Center and get all the supports and services they need. In fact, they get more therapies than they would in any other school in South Carolina.
So like, and that's a good model. I'm legitimately curious. So like, you know, that's probably a lot harder, maybe a lot harder to raise that type of funds in Sumter or some other further rural county, one child. So how is that gap?
Well, that's a good point, but that's why the charter model will be a real lean at the local school level, so that the money is going to the child in the classroom and not over a bloated, even school level bureaucracy. And so we have to be smart with our money. We have to budget wisely at the district and the school level. But if
So does the district, I mean, you guys have a lot of students, do you have the capacity to shift some funds to a school?
No, you know what our district budget is? $5.5 million. For a district that has 45 schools, 22,000 students, in almost every single zip code in South Carolina. Guys, that's how you do it. You do more with less. And I think that's really the great grand story about charter schools over the last 30 years, is that we've been able to meet the demand. We've been able to prove ourselves academically on the state report card. And yes, there's been some bad performers, and we closed those schools. But overall, when you look at the whole story, we've been able to perform, we've been able to provide more access to more families, and we've been able to put kids first.
One last question, we're over time, and you guys need to go eat dinner. But we'll take one last question if there's one. Yes?
Okay, we're so grateful at the College of Education to host this conversation, and we hopefully will make Ian very happy, because we don't always go on record, but we want to be on record that we support competitive teacher pay. We love that. But our question is, if the demand for autonomy and less bureaucracy are so high in the scholastic marketplace, why don't we offer that control, authority, and local accountability to all our state schools?
So I support that.
Well, that was easy.
I support that. I mean, who can be against that? I mean, 25% of our teachers can be non-certified. I think traditional districts should be able to do that. If you've got a retired scientist or an engineer that would like to come back and give something back in the community and teach math or science, why wouldn't we want that? Why wouldn't we want the best of American society to be able to come back and have a second, third career and teach and give something back to the children in the classroom? And so that's one example. I think we're teaching, quite frankly, traditional districts how to be more lean when it comes to budgeting and operations. You don't have to spend all the money that we do sometimes in public education on some of the frills and things like that. I mean, I know it looks nice to have the shiny school boards, and it looks great when your child's out on the field. But
On AstroTurf.
Do we really? Yeah, on AstroTurf.
On AstroTurf.
But again, I go back to the $37 million. Think about how many kids are poverty that school district could have supported with extra supports and tutoring and literacy programs instead of putting it on the football field. I just think that education is more important.
well, just to amplify part
This is anti-football.
of, do you want to respond to
Well,
that?
I am right now.
But I will say that part of the question you asked really ties back to the legislative intent of the Charter School Act. You know, one of the notions is that there are things we would try in the charter school sector and, scale up, see if it works. And so if you're thinking about them as sort of deregulated schools, are there flexibilities that charter schools have that we might contemplate? And that's a complex dynamic for how you get those changes to occur with various stakeholders. And you may know what I'm not saying, but at the end of the day, that's kind of the heart of charter schools. Yes, it's about options. It's about options for parents and kids, but also about providing other instructional models that teachers may leverage. That's something that's happened in our state. It's often overlooked. It's about student achievement, closing achievement gap. You go through the law, but one of the other things is it provides an avenue for us to see, how do these flexibilities work in charter schools? And is it something we want to bring over to the traditional sector? Not always the case, but it could be. And I think it would be great if we saw more of that.
Well, you guys are troopers. Thank you for sitting through this, and hopefully it was interesting and stimulating and thought-provoking. I'm sorry we couldn't cover everything. As you can see, like we could go on and on with this, right? There's really a lot. And maybe we will. Maybe we'll organize another public conversation at some point in the future to talk more about charter schools and traditional schools and that sort of thing. The Education Lab at the Post and Courier likes feedback, and we love to hear from people, all kinds of people, with story ideas, with thoughts, with constructive criticism, with all kinds of things. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can find us at postandcourier.com/educationlab, I think, is the URL. There might be a hyphen in there. Is there a hyphen in Education Lab? Oh, Google it. Robbie Scott would like to offer some closing remarks. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you. I think Adam is correct that many of us could stay here all night and discuss this.
Not all night, not all night.
Many of us could, but I really want to be respectful of those of you that have to drive back tonight to Greenville, Aiken, Myrtle Beach, or catch a plane. We just want to thank you so very much for coming. I specifically want to thank Chris Neely, Mika Childs, Trevor Ivy, and Derek Black. Thank you so much. Our ever entertaining moderators, Ian Grenier and Adam Parker. Thank you very much. Our event simply would, again, I'm going to repeat, it would not be possible for us to be sitting in this room tonight if it was not for the South Carolina Children's Fund. And we thank them and our host, the College of Education, University of South Carolina. So one thing you may not know about the Education Lab, we don't just report on news, we live it. We have 33 interns across the state of South Carolina at 7 different colleges and universities. We have 10 here at the University of South Carolina and 3 in this room tonight. I want to thank Sydney Levine, Lizzie Clem, and our photojournalist intern, Shayna Turner. Thank you very much. So as you heard me say earlier tonight, this is the second in a series of forums we're going to be presenting across South Carolina. Others upcoming will be AI in teaching and learning, math and reading outcomes in the Palmetto States, and book bans in South Carolina. As a reminder, all of the content that we publish with the Post and Courier Education Lab is free thanks to our sponsors. You do not need to be a subscriber. Likewise, all of our newsletters are also free. Again, no subscription required. The Ed Lab consists of myself, the director, Adam, the editor, and 3 reporters in Charleston, Columbia, and Greenville covering the state. Ladies and gentlemen, that is simply unprecedented for a newspaper or media company of our size. No doubt about it, if you would like to see us sustain this kind of transparent, solutions-based journalism and education and reporting, continue these conversations, please consider making a donation of any amount to postandcourierfund.com. We also have pledge cards outside if you want to take one of those with you. If you are interested in sponsoring one of these events, my business cards are outside as well. With that donation and with that ask, I want to tell you there's no more critical time to do that than right now, because we have just received a $50,000 matching grant from South Carolina Children's Fund. Every dollar you give up to $50,000. As you're on your ride home tonight, please think about sharing your comments with us. We appreciate your time. Thank you so very much for coming. Safe travels to each and every one of you. Good night.
Yeah.